All right. Well, I wanted to spend a few minutes tonight talking about how the language we use affects how we act and think about climate solutions. And to do this, I'm going to ask you to use your rational frontal cortex to understand how your lizard brain in the back of your head sits above your spinal column actually influences our particular actions. I wanted to begin with a story about wind turbines and golden eagles. And this is a photo of a golden eagle I took out west. I think that talking about nature is one of the 5 good narratives for having a discussion or telling a story about climate. And everything we do has a connection to the earth and nature, and the natural world is a good place for that story to start. So every year I spend about 3 to 4 weeks. My wife likes to say wandering around in the desert, but that's essentially what I do. And I go out to the Southwest. And a couple of years ago, I was driving toward the Abajo Mountains. And in the distance, and you can see forever out west, as you know, I could see these wind turbines on the foothills of Abajo Mountain. And being curious, as I got closer, I kind of went past the town sign. There's a little town called Monticello, and it's got a population of about 892, Monticello, Utah. And so I'm trying to drive closer to these wind turbines to actually, see how big they are and what they're doing and that sort of thing. And I turned into a little area called the Canyon Country Discovery Center, which is a museum and a school in this little town of 1,800 people. And there I met a woman who, her name is April Basin, and she runs the school there. And I started to ask her questions, and she said, well, come on out back, ask her questions about the Latigo wind farm there. And it provides, there are about 36 turbines out there, provides enough power to power 10,000 homes, and it's owned by S Power out of Salt Lake City. So she gave me a little tour, and the thing I remember most was stopping and asking her, and you can't see it from this shot, but what are those 2 towers on either end of this wind farm? They almost look like bird hides, like you hide in to photograph birds. And she said, well, that's exactly what they are. They are for spotters. And S Power had hired an organization called Hawk Watch International, which if you look it up, it's a good organization to belong to if you're interested in birds or raptors, to do a study to see if they could stop the turbines if golden eagles were flying through this wind farm. And I was just totally blown away. I had one thought that kind of entered my brain at that point, and that was, there is no way that this is going to scale if we need to have human intervention to keep wind turbines from interacting with birds. Minnesota is at 25% renewable energy, of which 20% is wind energy now. And within 5 years, we'll be at 40% renewable, most of which, again, is going to be wind energy. Good news is that if you throw nuclear in there right now, we're over 50% non-carbon in Minnesota. So we are on a path, but the golden eagle is a marquee species, not a keystone species, but everybody identifies with eagles. We've got our American eagle. The golden eagle is in the West, and there are maybe 40 to 50,000 golden eagles left. Unlike the bald eagle, their population is declining. Bald eagles have come back now with the endangered species list and the elimination of DDT, but out west, these are declining. And so April connected me with Dr. Steve Slater at Hawk Watch, who was actually doing this study. And I spent a couple hours interviewing him. but I also started to do my own research on wind energy. I mean, if this is going to be an obstacle, maybe we need to figure out what to do about it. And the first question I asked is, how pervasive is the threat to birds by wind turbines? Turbines are increasing, in one study, and I've got a reference in here if Tim sends this out, but Michael Bernard found that there were between 86,000 and 234,000 birds killed in the continental US due to wind turbines. But the issue is, in part, that that's probably too many, but what does bird mortality look like across the whole spectrum here? And I don't know if you can see this, but I'll highlight a couple of things. The two biggest areas are Miss Putty Tat here, birds killing around 500 million, cats killing around 500 million birds a year, and windows over almost 1 billion birds a year. So when we put up US Bank Stadium, I think some of you know that there was a plea to put the right kind of reflective glass so that we wouldn't get bird collisions here. But wind turbines account right down here in the noise level for this. Now, this study is a little older, but it's still important to kind of figure this out. It turns out birds have lots of threats here, and the interesting thing from the Michael Bernard paper that I was doing some research with was, he says that the biggest killers of birds are habitat destruction, pesticides, and global warming. That's not including feral cats and windows. And he makes this statement, which is a pretty radical statement. Says that replacing all the fossil fuel generation with wind turbines worldwide would save tens of millions of birds' lives annually. And I thought that was a pretty radical statement. There's a reference there if you want to kind of take a look at it here. The question is, what do we do about the marquee species like golden eagles? Well, there are solutions to bird collisions. And it's not just birds, it's bats too that run the potential, although they're quite a bit less. First of all, siting a wind farm properly. You don't want to put it on a prairie dog town because that attracts raptors, as an example. You don't want to put it in a migratory bird path like the Niobrara River in Nebraska. Rounding them so they have no purchasing surfaces, putting everything underground so there are no guy wires, because guy wires, by the way, are one of the things that can influence whether a bird is killed. Painting them with UV reflective paint so that birds can actually see them. Avoiding certain colors that attract insects. I just read a study in Europe about painting one blade black or dark purple had a 70% reduction in the number of bird collisions with turbines. The one that I'm familiar with is not trimming the grass around the base of the turbine, because that attracts ground squirrels if it's trimmed, and it also provides an open visual field. And there's lots of things that are being implemented to reduce this particular issue. One I found in a French paper, a solution is, some of you might recognize this character here, but I just call it the Googly Eye Solution. French research team was researching how to avoid raptor jet collisions, which take a number of lives over the last 20 years. They tested out 300 different images and found out that this particular set of googly eyes would reduce that potential of eagles and raptors flying in the area of an airport by about 80%. It's some sort of optical illusion that happens there. I felt somewhat encouraged in this process. But, what are we to make of this? And how do words kind of influence how we think about this problem? I've described the problem. We're thinking about it intellectually. And some of you know what a frame is. A frame is a way to have a short story or an expression that sort of frames the argument maybe into being one-sided. And the one reason it works is because of the way our brains work. It connects a neural pathway that activates a certain image or a certain idea and a certain feeling. And so what I do here a lot of is this kind of discussion when it comes to wind turbines. I hear these terms. And there are over 30 fossil fuel sponsored think tanks spending millions of dollars to promote the usage of fossil fuels pipelines, and they tend to also put out propaganda against electric vehicles, solar, wind energy, and a number of other energy sources. So the idea, though, is that they put out this kind of information, and we often hear this: it's too expensive, or it isn't reliable, or wind caused the Texas power grid, or they kill billions of birds. These are all frames or stories that they are telling. And the question then becomes for us is, how do we respond to that? And it's pretty simple. That giant sucking sound that you hear is us responding to the frames of the fossil fuel industry. When we fight a frame, we actually entrench it. So if I say something like, if I hear the term clean coal, and you say back to me, coal is not clean, all the brain hears is the word coal and clean, until pretty soon half of us believe there's such a thing as clean coal. So the first thing we can do is not fight what we're, not feeding what we're fighting, and avoiding trying to use the negation of it. Don't even mention it. Don't even respond at all. The second thing we can do is actually make direct statements. Wind energy is safe, or wind energy is cheap, or wind energy is the fastest growing new energy that we've got. And the third thing we can do is we can pivot to our own vision of the future and our own stories. I believe in a future where our kids can breathe clean air, where our water is pure, and they're assured of a safe future. That's the way we respond to these kinds of frames. As climate reality leaders, our job is to inspire and lead people. And in order to do this, we have to believe that we can succeed. And this is where we start. And the only way we can do that is by telling better stories and ignoring what is going on the other side with respect to building fossil fuels. And next week, if they ever let me back, or next month, we might talk about renewable natural gas as a frame. But anyway, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Hobie. Excellent as always. Really, really appreciate you doing that. And incredibly interesting too. The stats are really, really revealing. So.
I also think that from an industry standpoint, whether it's solar and or wind, that the industry could do a better job of working with local communities. The Tigo wind farm that I mentioned gave nothing back to the community in which that farm was located. I've also heard of examples. A woman contacted me from upstate New York saying their whole town was going to be surrounded by a 900-acre solar farm, when in fact, there's plenty of places to put and site farms. And so fighting misinformation is one thing, but also, asking the locals and getting them involved in the process is also really important.
Anybody else?
I would add one other thing, by the way, when we're talking about birds. Dr. Steve Slater just finished a study on golden eagles. On the biggest mortality risk to golden eagles is collisions with cars and trucks. It turns out that they are carrion feeders. And so, being a rather large bird, they aren't quite as agile as ravens and crows and other birds that might feed off of carrion. And so they can't get out of the way. And he's actually worked on he's working with the DNRs and wildlife management of each state out west now. Basically, he's discovered if you move roadkill carcass off the road by 15 yards, the collision rate drops to almost zero. And this is one of the biggest threats to golden eagles in the West that we have. So here's another solution, not necessarily connected directly with climate, although birds are affected by climate, but where we can actually make an impact and preserve the outdoor world and nature as it might need to be.
Well, great. Hobie and Jocelyn, thank you again. And real quickly for everybody who's still on, our next chapter meeting is Wednesday, June 9th at 6:30.